Governance of the Internet, MPCR 5000, written and presented by Professor Scott D. Applegate, Georgetown University. Today, we're diving into governance of the Internet, a topic that sits at the intersection of technology, policy, ethics, and international relations. As we move through this lecture, we'll trace the Internet's journey from a small military research project to the global infrastructure that now connects billions of people. More importantly, we'll grapple with critical questions. Who controls the Internet? Who should control it? What are the ethical implications of these governance decisions? These aren't just abstract policy questions. They affect everything from what content you can access online to whether your internet provider can slow down certain types of traffic. So now let me ask you a question. What is a computer network? Let's start with the absolute basics. What is a computer network? At its simplest, it's just one computer or device connected by some communications medium to another computer or device. That's it. The image on your screen shows this most fundamental network, two devices with a line between them. Think about the networks you interact with every day. Your laptop connecting to your home Wi-Fi router, your phone connecting to a cell tower, or your gaming console linking to a friend's console. Every one of these started with this simple concept, two devices that need to communicate. Now, let's zoom out dramatically. The internet isn't just two connected computers. It's hundreds of millions of computers and devices connected by various communications technologies to hundreds of millions of other computers and devices. Look at this visualization showing IPv4 addresses observed from June to October of 2012. The bright areas represent high concentrations of internet-connected devices. Notice how North America, Europe, and parts of Asia light up brightly, while Africa and parts of South America remain relatively dark. This map immediately raises questions about equity and access that we'll return to later. The sheer scale and complexity of this global network creates unprecedented governance challenges because no single entity owns or controls all of it. The internet allows you to almost instantaneously connect with individuals on the far side of the world. It allows you to leverage the knowledge of the ages. It allows you to learn new skills. I learned how to drywall my house from the internet. And yet the average person mostly uses it for entertainment, email, social media, pornography, and reinforcing their own personal biases. The internet is the greatest tool in the history of humanity, but like many inventions, it is a double-edged sword that can be used for both good and evil. It can have benefits and drawbacks. It has drawn us together and made us more interconnected than ever before, but it can divide us along political, social, economic, cultural, and racial lines. And so we must see it with a clear eye, and as cybersecurity professionals approach its use from an ethical perspective. Stephen Hawking once said, "We are now connected by the internet like neurons in a giant brain." I want you to sit with that metaphor for a moment. If the internet functions like neurons in a brain, what kind of consciousness or collective intelligence are we creating? Is this empowering, enabling humanity to solve problems collaboratively on a global scale? Or is it concerning, creating systems of control and surveillance that individual neurons, that is, individual people, can't escape? The tension between the internet's liberating potential and its capacity for control underlies many of the ethical dilemmas we'll explore today. Before we talk about internet governance, we need to understand that information security isn't a modern invention, it's ancient. The use of cryptography dates back to 1900 BCE. The Spartans used the scutale, which you can see in the image, a cylinder around which they wrapped a strip of leather with a message that could only be read when wrapped around a cylinder of the correct diameter. The Greeks took it to an even greater extreme, tattooing messages on the shaved heads of messengers and waiting for their hair to grow back before sending them. Waxed wood tablets were used as rewritable writing surfaces. To hide messages, a user would sometimes scrape off the wax, write the message on the wood underneath, and then re-wax the tablet, hiding the message. By 100 CE, Julius Caesar was using what we now call the Caesar cipher, shifting letters by a fixed number of positions. Why does this matter? Because it demonstrates that as long as humans have communicated, we've sought to protect sensitive information. The technologies change, but the fundamental needs for confidentiality, integrity, and controlled access remain constant. By comparison, computer security is a relatively recent evolution. Computer security began immediately after the first mainframes were developed. During World War II, groups working on code-breaking computations created the first modern computers. Look at this image of an early computer room, massive machines filling an entire floor. Security in this area was primarily physical. You could literally lock the computer in a room, station guards at the door, and limit access to personnel with security clearances. The threats were straightforward: physical theft, espionage, and sabotage. If someone couldn't physically get into the room, they couldn't access the computer. It was a simpler time, though the security measures were rudimentary by today's standards. These physical controls worked reasonably well when computers were rare, expensive, massive, and centralized, but that was about to change. The 1960s brought revolutionary changes. The Advanced Research Projects Agency, or ARPA, which later became DARPA, began examining the feasibility of redundant networked communications. This led to the first large-scale packet switching network. Let me explain packet switching because it's fundamental to how the internet works. Instead of establishing a dedicated circuit between 2 points for the duration of a communication, like a traditional phone call, packet switching breaks messages into fixed-size packets, labels each one with origin and destination information, and sends them independently across the network. Different packets can take different routes and be reassembled at the destination. Larry Roberts developed ARPANET in 1969. Look at this hand-drawn network diagram. This was the Internet's beginning. The initial motivation was military. How could communications survive if parts of the network were destroyed in a nuclear attack? The answer was redundancy and distributed routing. This design philosophy, that the network should be resilient and route around damage, still shapes the Internet today. Larry Roberts, known as the founder of the Internet, developed the project from its inception. On October 29, 1969, computers at Stanford and UCLA connected for the first time. They were the first hosts on what would one day become the Internet. So the Internet is basically 4 months younger than I am. In the late 1960s, an early focus of computer security research was a system called Multics, the Multiplexed Information and Computing Service. This is historically significant because Multics was the first operating system created with security as a primary goal. It was a mainframe, time-sharing operating system developed in the mid-1960s through collaboration between General Electric, Bell Labs, and MIT. You can see the Multics hardware in this photograph. Several key players from the Multics project later went on to create Unix. However, and this is important, the primary purpose of Unix was text processing, not security. This represents a fundamental shift in priorities from security-first design to functionality-first design. Unix heavily influenced the design of Linux and FreeBSD, the operating systems most popular in today's web servers and web hosting services. We're still dealing with the consequences of that trade-off today. Many of our modern operating systems descend from Unix, and we've spent decades trying to add security features to systems not originally designed with security as a primary goal. The 1970s marked the birth of modern computer security as a discipline. Computer security began with the RAND report R609, sometimes referred to as the paper that started the study of computer security, sponsored by the Department of Defense, which attempted to define multiple controls and mechanisms necessary for the protection of a multi-level computer system. The scope of computer security grew from physical security to include safety of the data itself, limiting of random and unauthorized access to the data, involvement of personnel from multiple levels of the organization, hardware leakage points, software leakage points, communication leakage points, and organizational leakage. It did not specifically address personnel security. This was a fundamental expansion in how people thought about security. It was no longer just about guards and locked doors. It was about policies, procedures, access controls, and organizational culture. This more comprehensive view of security as a multi-layered challenge involving people, processes, and technology remains the foundation for information security today. During the next decade, as ARPANET grew in popularity during the 1970s, so did its potential for misuse. Fundamental security problems were identified. There were no safety procedures for dial-up connections to ARPANET. User identification and authorization were essentially non-existent. Phone numbers were widely distributed and openly publicized on the walls of restrooms and phone booths, giving hackers easy access to ARPANET. The network was designed for collaboration among trusted researchers, not for security against adversaries. Email was invented in 1971 by Ray Tomlinson. He chose the @ symbol to separate the user name from the computer name, and that convention stuck. In the late 1970s, microprocessors began expanding computer capabilities beyond mainframes, which also expanded security threats. Development of the TCP/IP protocol started in 1974. We'll talk more about that in a moment. The term Internet was first used in 1974 to describe this network of networks. The first modern email program was developed in 1975, making email more accessible. And in 1978, spam was born, the first unsolicited commercial email. Look at this ARPANET geographic map from 1973. You can see how the network had grown significantly from the original 4-node network in 1969. In 1982, U.S. Undersecretary of Defense Richard DeLauer ordered the conversion to TCP/IP by January 1, 1983. The ARPANET was to have finished a conversion from Network Control Protocol, which it was on, to Transmission Control Protocol, Internet Protocol, otherwise known as TCP/IP. The transition went smoothly, and everyone got a button for their hard work stating, "I survived the TCP/IP transition." The protocol wars occurred from the 1970s to the 1990s when engineers, organizations, and nations became polarized over the issue of which communication protocol would result in the best and most robust computer networks. This accumulated in the Internet OSI standards war of the late 80s and early 90s. As public data networks emerged in the mid to late 70s, the debate over interface standards was described as a battle for access standards. Several proprietary standards emerged, and the European Postal, Telegraph, and Telephone Services developed the X.25 standard in 1976, which was adopted on public networks providing global coverage. The United States Department of Defense developed and tested TCP/IP during the 1970s in collaboration with universities and researchers in the United States, the United Kingdom, and France. Internet Protocol version 4, also called IPv4, was released in 1981, and the DoD made it standard for all military computer networking. By 1984, an international reference model known as the Open Systems Interconnection, or OSI model, had been agreed on, with which TCP/IP was not compatible. Many governments in Europe, particularly France, Germany, the United Kingdom, and the European Economic Community, and also the United States Department of Commerce, mandated compliance with the OSI model, and the U.S. Department of Defense planned to transition away from TCP/IP to OSI. Let me briefly explain what TCP/IP does. The Transmission Control Protocol, or TCP, provides a communication service at an intermediate level between an application program and the Internet Protocol. The Internet Protocol, or IP, establishes unique numeric addresses for every device on the network. Together, TCP/IP became the universal language of the Internet. Meanwhile, the development of a complete Internet Protocol suite by 1989 and partnerships with telecommunication and computer industry to incorporate TCP/IP software into various operating systems laid the foundation for widespread adoption of TCP/IP as a comprehensive protocol suite. While OSI developed its networking standards in the late 1980s, TCP/IP came into widespread use on multi-vendor networks for internetworking and is the core component of the emerging Internet. This cemented its dominance in the emerging Internet marketplace. The development of the Domain Name System, or DNS, in 1984 was a crucial step forward. Look at this diagram showing the DNS hierarchy. DNS translates numeric IP addresses like 216.58.194.174 into human-readable domain names like google.com. This infrastructure, TCP/IP and DNS, still underpins the Internet today. When we talk about Internet governance later, control over DNS and IP addresses becomes a major point of contention. The Morris worm was one of the first computer worms distributed via the internet and the first to gain significant mainstream media attention. It also resulted in the first felony conviction in the U.S. under the 1986 Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It was written by a graduate student at Cornell University, Robert Tappan Morris, and launched on November 2, 1988 from the computer systems of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Estimates put the cost of the damages between $100,000 and $10 million. It is usually reported that around 6,000 major Unix machines were infected by the Morris worm. That estimate might be high, however, Clifford Stoll, prominent in the field at the time, put the estimate closer to 2,000 systems, but noted that they were infected within about 15 minutes and remained completely useless until the worm was cleaned off their system, which took a couple of days. This represented about a third of the fledgling internet at the time. The Morris worm prompted DARPA to fund the establishment of the first Computer Emergency Response Team, or CERT, at Carnegie Mellon University, giving experts a central point for coordinating responses to network emergencies. Morris was tried and convicted of violating United States Code Title 18, subsection 1030, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act in the United States v. Morris. After appeals, he was sentenced to 3 years probation, 400 hours of community service, and a fine of $10,050 plus the cost of his supervision. Also in 1988, the first Internet Relay Chat, or IRC, was developed, enabling real-time text communication. America Online, or AOL, launched in 1989, bringing the Internet to mainstream consumers who weren't computer scientists or researchers. This transition from an academic research network to something with broader commercial potential brought new users, new uses, and of course, new security vulnerabilities. The internet was no longer just a tool for trusted researchers, it was becoming a public space that required protection. The 1990s brought perhaps the most transformative development in internet history, the World Wide Web. Sir Timothy John Berners-Lee is an English computer scientist best known as the inventor of the World Wide Web, or more specifically, Hypertext Markup Language, HTML, which underpins the World Wide Web. He is a professorial fellow of computer science at the University of Oxford and a professor at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Look at this example of HTML code and a photo of Berners-Lee. The key innovation was the hyperlink, a way for documents to reference each other across the entire globe. Markup is a system of symbols embedded into text to indicate how information should be displayed and how different parts relate to each other. HTML allowed anyone to create linked documents that could be viewed by anyone else on the internet. In 1990, the first web page went online. The first search protocol called Gopher was developed, and even the first webcam was created, famously to monitor a coffee pot at Cambridge University so researchers could check to see if there was coffee before walking to the break room. The web transformed the internet from a specialized tool for technical experts into something accessible to everyone. Footstomp. If you are asked who invented the internet, the answer is Larry Roberts and ARPA. If you are asked who created the World Wide Web, the answer is Tim Berners-Lee. In 1993, Mosaic became the first widely popular web browser. Look at this diagram showing early web architecture and various services. Mosaic could display both text and images in the same window, revolutionary at the time. However, connectivity was based on slow dial-up modems. For those old enough to remember that distinctive screeching handshake sound, you'll recall how painfully slow it was. Images did not load well. Tim Berners-Lee developed the World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, in 1994 to develop standards for the web and ensure interoperability. Netscape was founded in 1994 and quickly became the dominant internet browser. The internet grew by 2,300% in 1994, an astonishing expansion. The development of Secure Socket Layer, or SSL protocol, in 1995 enabled secure encrypted communications which made e-commerce possible. What did SSL do that led to commercialization of the internet? It allowed users to securely transmit credit card information across the internet using encryption. By 1988, America Online had overtaken Netscape in popularity, marking the shift from the browser as a standalone tool to integrated internet services. The 2000s brought the social internet. Wikipedia launched in 2001, creating a collaborative encyclopedia that anyone could edit. Voice over Internet Protocol, or VoIP, went mainstream in 2003, allowing phone calls over the Internet. MySpace became the most popular social network in 2003. The CAN-SPAM Act in 2003 attempted to put a lid on unsolicited commercial email with limited success. Facebook launched for college students in 2004. YouTube started in 2005, democratizing video content creation. Twitter began tweeting in 2006 with its 140-character limit. And in 2007, the iPhone launched, bringing the mobile web to the masses. This decade fundamentally changed what the internet was for. It became less about accessing information and more about creating content, connecting with others, and sharing experiences. This shift from consumption to creation and from anonymity to identity brought new ethical challenges around privacy, authenticity, and influence. Let's step back and consider a few characteristics that make the internet unique. First and foremost, the internet's most notable characteristic is its openness. Thanks to an open-ended network architecture, the internet has supported an extraordinary level of innovation, including email, blogs, instant messaging, digital music and movie files, and social media applications. Just a few of the many applications that technology platforms have enabled. Second, it's asynchronous. There's no need for coordination between the sender and receiver of a message. You can send an email whenever you want, and the recipient reads it whenever they want. Third, it permits a many-to-many form of communication. Unlike broadcasting, where one transmits to many, or traditional telephony, where one communicates with one, the internet allows complex patterns of communication among multiple parties. Fourth, it's a distributed network with no central server or controlling authority. There's no single point of failure, but also no single point of control. Finally, it's highly scalable and is not directly affected when new computer links are added or deleted. The network adapts. These characteristics enable amazing innovation but create profound governance challenges. If there's no central authority, who makes the rules? Who enforces them? These questions bring us to the heart of today's topic, governance.
Let's look at how the internet actually works. On the left, you see the OSI reference model. On the right, the TCP/IP protocol suite. I'm not going to get too deeply technical, but the key concept is layering. The internet works through layered protocols. Each layer has specific functions and interfaces with the layers above and below it. At the bottom, you have the physical layer, actual cables, radio waves, and fiber optics. Moving up, you have layers that handle routing and then reliable communication. And finally, at the top, the applications you actually use, like web browsers and email clients. This modular layer design is crucial because it enables flexibility and innovation. It allows you to isolate and tackle specific challenges at each layer without having to make adjustments to the other layers in the protocol stack. Someone can develop a new application at the top layer without redesigning the routing or physical infrastructure at other layers. This separation of concerns has been the key to the internet's rapid evolution. Let's look at TCP/IP through an analogy of writing and mailing a letter. First, you write your letter. This is the data you want to send. Then you put that letter, the data, into an envelope. This ensures privacy and security. This is called encapsulation and happens at each level of these models. Each layer has its own form of encapsulation. So, think of this as putting an addressed envelope from one layer into an addressed envelope at the next layer, and so on and so forth. The addresses at each layer tell that layer how to handle the data inside the envelope. You put addresses for yourself and the addressee on the outside of the envelope. Your address goes in the top left and the addressee's goes in the center. This is a protocol. Each layer has its own address protocol, such as an IP address or a MAC address. You then mail the letter. Unless you have chosen a specific transportation or delivery method, you have no idea how that letter is being transported or what route it is taking. The Postal Service makes these choices for you in most cases, just as TCP/IP makes choices on how your data is routed and delivered. The mail is then physically transported. It can travel by air, ground, or sea. This is the physical media in the network and could be cables, radio waves, fiber optics, or even satellite links. All of this is opaque to you, the user. Layer 1, the physical layer, handles the physical transmission of data. Layer 2, the data link layer, handles delivery to the next node. Think of this as the mailman transporting your letter from your mailbox to the post office, the next node. Layer 3, the Internet Protocol layer, handles routing. Think of this as the Postal Service transporting your letter from one post office to another across the country or even across the world. Layer 4, the transport layer, handles end-to-end communication and reliability between applications. It ensures your data is delivered to the right application on your computer and that, if it is lost, it is retransmitted. Layer 5, the application layer, is how you interact with the computer. This is you writing or reading the letter.
Here's a more detailed view of how TCP/IP fits into both the OSI and actual TCP/IP suite. At the application layer, you have protocols like Hypertext Transfer Protocol, HTTP for web pages, File Transfer Protocol, FTP for file transfer, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, SMTP for email, and Domain Name Systems, DNS, for name resolution. This is the layer that you, the user, actually interact with. Below that, TCP provides reliable communication, ensuring that packets arrive in order and requesting retransmission if packets are lost. The Transmission Control Protocol provides a communication service at the intermediate level between an application program and the Internet Protocol. It provides host-to-host connectivity at the transport layer of the Internet model. An application does not need to know the particular mechanisms for sending data via a link to another host, such as the required IP fragmentation to accommodate the maximum transmission unit of the transmission medium. At the transport layer, TCP handles all handshaking and transmission details and presents an abstraction of the network connection to the application, typically through a network socket interface. The Internet Protocol is responsible for addressing host interfaces, encapsulating data into datagrams, including fragmentation and reassembly, and routing datagrams from the source host interface to a destination host interface across one or more IP networks. Basically, IP handles addressing and routing. The network layer defines the networking methods within the scope of the local network link on which hosts communicate without intervening routers. This layer includes the protocols used to describe the local network topology and the interfaces needed to effect the transmission of internet layer datagrams to next neighbor hosts. It is sometimes described as consisting of two distinct layers, the media access control layer and the physical layer. The key insight is that TCP/IP enables complete interoperability. A computer in Tokyo running Linux can communicate seamlessly with a computer in New York running Windows because they both speak the same language, TCP/IP. This standardization is what makes the global internet possible, but it also means that vulnerabilities in these protocols can have a worldwide impact. When we discuss governance, we're talking about who controls these standards and protocols.
Now we arrive at one of the most controversial issues in internet governance, net neutrality. The internet's original design principle was end-to-end, that intelligence and processing should happen at the endpoints, the devices you use, not in the network itself. The network should be a dumb pipe that simply moves packets without inspecting or prioritizing them. Net neutrality means that internet service providers and telecom companies are required to treat every form of data equally. No fast lanes, no tolls, no discrimination between different types of packets. You pay for a certain speed, and you get that speed for everything, whether you're streaming Netflix, video calling on Zoom, or browsing Wikipedia. If a network is constructed in accordance with this idea, intelligence in the network, such as software applications, is located at the ends, but not in the network itself. The core of the network is simply a data movement capability that transfers data from one destination or end to another without inspecting that data or discriminating against certain forms of data in any way. Thus, competitive neutrality and openness were inscribed in the original design of the internet through its basic protocols. Some countries like Chile, the Netherlands, and Slovenia have passed laws codifying net neutrality. In the United States, this has been a political football. In 2015, the Obama administration issued an order through the Federal Communications Commission reclassifying broadband services as a utility. making it subject to common carrier provisions like telephone service. In 2017, the Trump administration rescinded that FCC order. On April 25, 2024, the Federal Communications Commission voted to restore net neutrality rules that had been repealed in 2017. This decision reinstated a national standard for broadband reliability, security, and consumer protection, treating broadband internet services as an essential service under Title II of the Communications Act. The rule prohibits internet service providers from blocking or throttling lawful content and from creating fast lanes for companies willing to pay more for better service. The question at stake is fundamental. Should the internet be treated like a utility that everyone has equal access to, or like a commercial service where providers can offer different tiers and prioritize different content? Like any contentious issue, there are arguments for and against net neutrality. Let's examine both sides of this debate fairly, because thoughtful people can disagree. Proponents of net neutrality argue that without regulation, internet service providers will throttle speeds, charge more for faster service, or block websites and competing apps. They point to instances in which ISPs have slowed traffic from competitors or demanded payment from content providers. They argue that regulation is required to ensure an open, secure internet that remains a level playing field for innovation. A startup should have the same access to customers as an established company. On the other side, opponents argue that regulation stymies investment in competition. They claim transparency is sufficient to protect against abusive practices. If ISPs must disclose their traffic management practices, market forces will prevent abuse. They argue less regulation helps enable needed private investments to increase broadband access and internet speeds, especially in rural areas where service is expensive to provide. They contend the internet is already open and that this openness has fueled an unprecedented global expansion of free speech and economic opportunity. Both sides claim to support an open internet, but they define openness differently and disagree on the role of regulation. In 2024, users generated 149 zettabytes of data, which exceeded the number of detectable stars in the universe. Experts expect the figures to rise, with data creation reaching 181 zettabytes by the end of 2025. In 2024, on average, TikTok videos produced approximately 7 terabytes of data daily. In 2025, humanity took approximately 2.1 trillion photos. Globally, we capture 5.3 billion photos daily, or 61,400 per second. 95 million photos and videos are shared every day on Instagram. 1.7 megabytes of data per person was created every second during 2025. In the last 2 years alone, an astonishing 90% of the world's data has been created, and experts predict that the global data volume will double approximately every 4 years. 2.5 quintillion bytes of data are produced by humans every day. 463 exabytes of data was generated each day by humans as of 2025. Every day, 376 billion email messages are sent. Now, given the astonishing amount of data available, how do we find the proverbial needle in the haystack? What determines what information you are able to find on the internet? Beyond ISPs, other actors serve as gatekeepers to information online. Browsers, internet service providers, and portals all mediate your access to content, but perhaps the most powerful are search engines. Look at this grid showing different specialized search engines for images, music, video, health, shopping, and other categories. The politics of search engines raise several concerns. First, Google's dominance. It handles about 90% of all searches globally. Second, impartiality issues. How do search engines decide what appears on the first page of results? Can they be manipulated? Third, monetization. Google's business model depends on advertising, so paid results appear alongside organic results. How clearly is it to distinguish these? Finally, privacy issues. Search engines collect vast amounts of data about what you're looking for. These private companies make algorithmic decisions that profoundly affect what billions of people see and learn. When Google adjusts its search engine algorithm, entire businesses can rise or fall based on whether they appear on the first page of results. Should search engines be regulated? How do we balance innovation and competition with fairness and transparency? Social networking platforms introduce additional governance challenges. Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, X, formerly known as Twitter, these platforms have become the digital public squares where much of our political and social discourse happens. Yik Yak experimented with anonymity, allowing users to post without revealing their identity, which led to both honest expression and harmful abuse. Facebook maintains a controversial real name principle requiring users to use their legal names. This enhances accountability and reduces trolling, but it can endanger dissidents in authoritarian countries, abuse survivors trying to escape their abusers, and LGBTQ individuals not out to their families. Social networking raises accountability issues. How do we balance free expression with preventing harassment? And we've seen how these platforms can be used to influence online populations, spreading misinformation, manipulating elections, and polarizing societies. In Myanmar, Facebook was used to incite genocide. In the United States, foreign actors use social media to interfere with elections. Who's responsible for policing content on these platforms? The companies themselves? Governments? Users? There are no easy answers. So, how do we regulate the internet? There are four main approaches. First, the invisible hand. Let the market fix problems like spam. If users don't like a service, they'll switch to a competitor and bad actors will be driven out by market forces. Second, the invisible hand. Extensive government regulations. Governments pass laws and establish regulatory agencies to enforce standards and punish violations. Third, norms. Policing ourselves. Online communities develop their own norms of behavior and enforce them through social pressure, reputation systems, and community moderation. Fourth, the tyranny of code. Regulation through infrastructure itself. You can see code on the screen. Lawrence Lessig famously argued that code is law. The way systems are designed and programmed determines what's possible. If the architecture makes certain behaviors impossible or difficult, you've regulated without passing a law. Each approach has strengths and weaknesses. Markets can be slow and may not protect vulnerable populations. Government regulation can stifle innovation and may not keep pace with rapid technological change. Norms vary across communities and may exclude outsiders. Code-based control is opaque and grants programmers enormous power. In practice, we use all four approaches simultaneously, which can lead to conflicts and confusion. Where have we seen these constraints before? Despite the Internet's distributed nature, several key organizations play governance roles. The World Wide Web Consortium, or W3C, develops standards for the web. The Internet Engineering Task Force, or IETF, develops technical standards for the core Internet protocols. The Domain Name System is administered by the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, or ICANN, with tasks delegated to various domain name registries. DNS is a hierarchical system divided into separate domains: the root, top-level domains like .com and .edu, and lower-level domains. DNS translates Internet Protocol addresses, those numeric addresses like 172.217.164.110, into readable text addresses called Uniform Resource Locators, or URLs, like www.georgetown.edu. These organizations have enormous power. ICANN, for example, controls the root zone file, essentially the master directory of the Internet. Yet these are mostly private multi-stakeholder organizations, not government agencies. This raises questions. Are they accountable? To whom? Should governments have more control? These questions bring us to competing models of Internet governance. Multiple factors shape the debate on Internet governance, and they interact with each other in complex ways. Look at this diagram. At the center is Internet governance itself. Surrounding it are 6 factors. First, the significance of the net, how important the Internet has become to economic, social, and political life. Second, digital divides, the gaps between those with access to technology and those without, whether between countries or within them. Third, the trust bubble, concerns about privacy and surveillance heightened by Edward Snowden's revelations about NSA spying. Fourth, moral panics, Public anxiety about social media's effects on children, mental health, and democracy. Fifth, populations left out of policy discussions, developing countries, indigenous peoples, and others who lack voice in governance debates. Sixth, national policy and regulation, individual countries' laws and regulations that can conflict with the Internet's global nature. All of these factors influence each other. For example, Snowden's revelations about surveillance reduced trust, which led to calls for national regulation, which raised concerns about fragmenting of the global Internet and leaving some populations behind. Understanding these interconnections is crucial to understanding governance debates. What has emerged from this debate are two competing models: the multi-stakeholder approach, which is largely favored by liberal democracies, and the multilateral intergovernmental approach, which is largely championed by more authoritative regimes throughout the world. Now, I want to walk you through a detailed comparison of these two competing models. These tables are dense, so stay with me. The leading principles differ fundamentally. Multi-stakeholder emphasizes collaborative leadership amongst diverse stakeholders committing to solving particular problems. Multilateral emphasizes the sovereign rights of governments to determine Internet policy and regulation within their borders. The guiding assumptions are different. Multi-stakeholder assumes that experience, expertise, and commitment of individuals in the Internet community are key to fostering innovation. Multilateral assumes governments are the legitimate representatives of the national public interest. For representation, multi-stakeholder calls for direct engagement of the private sector, businesses, governments, international institutions, civil society, academia, and NGOs. Multilateral has national governments represent all interests in bilateral and multilateral treaties and agreements, with other stakeholders consulted but not deciding. The role of governments differs dramatically. In multi-stakeholder, governments are one key category amongst multiple stakeholders. In multilateral, governments represent other interests in intergovernmental entities.
The governance functions differ. Multi-stakeholder focuses on steering and communication. Multilateral focuses on setting and implementing policy and regulation. The process is participatory and bottom-up in multi-stakeholder versus top-down consultative in multilateral. Authority is horizontal across stakeholders in multi-stakeholder versus hierarchical within states and through international agreements in multilateral. Standard setting operates by rough consensus in multi-stakeholder versus multilateral agreements and treaties in the multilateral approach. Transparency is open in multi-stakeholder versus closed with open consultation in multilateral. Constituencies differ. Major stakeholders of an issue regardless of nationality in multi-stakeholder versus representatives of citizens of each nation in multilateral. Now for specific technical issues. Both approaches would centralize IP addressing in ICANN, but they differ on IANA, the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. Multi-stakeholder favors transitioning from U.S. Department of Commerce control to a newly proposed entity that's not government-led. Multilateral would transition to an intergovernmentally led entity like the International Telecommunications Union. Examples of multi-stakeholder organizations include the Internet Governance Forum. Examples of the multilateral approach include the World Intellectual Property Organization, the World Trade Organization, and the International Telecommunications Union. Who favors each? Liberal democracies like the United States and the European Union generally favor multi-stakeholder approaches. Authoritarian regimes like Russia and China favor the multilateral approach. The role of the Internet differs. Multi-stakeholder sees it as providing open, secure, global infrastructure for economic and social development and innovation. Multilateral sees it as something that must be controlled to protect the cybersecurity of nations and the social and economic development and culture of their citizens. The implications differ. Multi-stakeholder gives stakeholders a sense of ownership and keeps an open, global, secure internet, but processes move slowly and divisive issues can be ignored. Multilateral gives governments a sense of control and the ability to act on key concerns like security and content control, but decisions might lag behind technology and divisive issues within nations might block decision making. Key objectives differ. Multi-stakeholder emphasizes addressing the digital divide through infrastructure investment, achieving millennial development goals, avoiding fragmentation of the global internet, and keeping an open internet. Multilateral emphasizes putting governments in charge of critical internet resources, ensuring more equitable representation of national authorities, and maintaining national sovereignty over cybersecurity and internet policies in ways sensitive to national cultures and interests. Neither model is perfect. There are genuine trade-offs between openness and security, between innovation and control, between global consistency and national sovereignty, between individual liberty and community standards. Chris DeWolf, co-founder of MySpace, captured an important insight when he said, "When you were growing up, your mom and dad told you to look both ways before crossing the street and not to get into a car with a stranger. It's the same with the internet. We have a big responsibility and a huge role in bringing all stakeholders to the table: users, parents, educators, law enforcement, and global organizations." This quote emphasizes shared responsibility. Just as childhood safety requires parents, teachers, community members, and children themselves all playing roles, internet governance requires collaboration across diverse stakeholders. No single group has all the answers. Technical experts understand the infrastructure, but they don't necessarily understand the social impacts. Governments can pass laws, but they can't keep up with technological change without input from those building the technology. Users experience the benefits and harms firsthand, but they may not understand the technical and policy constraints. We need all these perspectives at the table. In summary, the advent and growth of the internet over the last 4 decades has utterly transformed the world, bringing with it numerous ethical and moral issues. While information technology has undoubtedly benefited the world, it is a dual-edged sword that can be used for both beneficial and malicious purposes. Dual-use technologies allow users to protect systems or compromise them. The same encryption that protects your banking information can protect cyber criminals. Issues such as net neutrality, internet governance, and the influence of social media could have significant ethical implications for hundreds of millions of internet users worldwide. As cybersecurity professionals, you need to come to understand not just the technical details, but the policy context and the ethical dimensions. The decisions made about internet governance will shape what kind of internet we have and what kind of society we have for decades to come. I want to leave you with this final thought from John Landgraf. Information technology and the internet are rapidly transforming almost every aspect of our lives, some for better, some for worse. This captures the fundamental ambivalence many of us feel about these technologies. The internet has enabled unprecedented communication, collaboration, and innovation. It's lifted millions out of poverty, connected families across continents, and democratized access to information. But it's also enabled unprecedented surveillance, manipulation, and cybercrime. It's amplified misinformation, facilitated human trafficking, and created new forms of addiction. As future cybersecurity professionals and ethical thinkers, your job isn't to be cheerleaders for technology or Luddites opposing it. Your job is to understand both the promise and the peril, to work towards maximizing the benefits while mitigating the harms, and to ensure that as we build this digital future, we're doing so thoughtfully, ethically, and inclusively. If you have questions about this presentation or other aspects of the course, please feel free to email me or post a question in the Ask Your Instructor discussion forum in Canvas. I tend to respond to email much faster than forum posts, but if you believe your question may be of interest to other students, the Ask Your Instructor forum may be the more appropriate venue. This has been Governance of the Internet, MPCR 5000, written and presented by Professor Scott D. Applegate, Georgetown University.